Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you for being here. We find ourselves at the pleasure or the terror of a small reading. So everyone's welcome to come closer. I'm here with a very close friend, Hannah, who I've known for a very long time, director of the Traore Gallery, fabulous person, intelligent person. I thought we could structure it today. I was going to read 3 excerpts from the book that are largely about working in museums. I have a former colleague from the Whitney who can fact check what I say about the Whitney. But the first section I thought I would read is about interning a little bit at the Whitney, is literally right after college and being there. And then the second section will be about working at MoMA for a little bit. And then the third section is about the history of the pop singer Robin. And they are connected in the sense that they are all moments or examples of people trying to find their own sort of path through systems that want different things from them at different times. So I'm so happy to have Hannah here, who has forged her own path through gallery world, through art world, and to be here together, 4 or 5 years after we first met at MoMA. And so what I thought we'd do is I'll read a section, and then I'll open it to Hannah for some comments, and then I'll read the next section, and then we'll open it up again. At any time, since we have the privilege of such a small space, raise your hand, even just shout into the ether, and we can talk some more. Anything you want to add?
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, cool. Thank you for being here. So this is excerpts from this book, Dancing on My Own, which will be out late June. They're essays on art, collectivity, and joy. And this first section is from an essay called For Everyone, which is mostly about my time at the Whitney. There's a fun picture when you look at the book eventually of the internship video that they made of my class, that if you go to the Whitney website, you can still watch. And these are me and my friend Rosa and Alberto's heads that they shot. And then Ferris is somewhere off in the back in the Whitney atrium looking down on here. So, okay, I'll read a little bit and then we'll talk some more. On my first day as an intern at the Whitney Museum, I met Rosa, who has round brown eyes and a sharp wit and whose parents were from Korea. And I met Alberto, who was soon revealed to be a teddy bear of a friend, the kind who crackles at your jokes and remembers the snacks you like. His parents were from Mexico, and I was surprised that most of the intern group was like us, children of immigrants or people of color, because we were used to the opposite in art. We worked in lily-white rooms with lily-white people. We sat at a little table in a big glass atrium of the museum's library and diligently printed checklists and scanned catalogs and did other administrative work that fell under the loose verb of curating. We commiserated over the fact that none of us could explain to our parents what we were doing. We weren't entirely sure what we were doing ourselves. Was this a real job? How did people make money doing this? Sometimes being at the museum felt like being reckless with our futures. This was not the stability that our parents had planned for us when moving to the US. Rather than interviewing for some secure corporate positions like many of our classmates, high-paying jobs to buy houses with high ceilings, we had chosen to follow our passions into precarious creative professions where a few others looked like us and our parents could offer little help. Children of immigrants who pursue creative careers often contend with the perceived opportunity cost of endangering the economic foothold their parents carved out for them. But still, we felt fancy. We went on internship trips to other museums, artist studios, and galleries in Chelsea. We met with curators and artists and writers. At lunch, we took walks on the High Line to defrost from the museum's AC. We learned what sample sales were and waited too long in line for them. We also bonded over our love for Costco. More than anything, we shared a sensibility. We were children of Tumblr, raised on critical theory PDFs and leftist YouTube. We discussed Sophie's song lyrics as seriously as we did museum retrospectives. We looked at Balenciaga runways as closely as Marx, queer theory as closely as Britney Spears' Instagram posts. It felt like an ethical stance to decenter our cultural consumption from the hierarchy of fine art that we worked within. Our critique of capitalism was alloyed by a particular susceptibility to and interest in its seductions, because sometimes understanding the desire strengthened rather than abated the want. One night we stood in line at a truly debased kind of want, a line to get into the after party for an alt-fashion brand Vaquera. Sophie was playing. We could see Ricky Thompson, an Instagram influencer, up ahead. An hour passed and we started to feel stupid. I was hungry. I could tell Alberto and Rosa were too. We hadn't had dinner, just drinks at an opening. Another hour passed and we thought about calling it. Alberto, sunny as ever, suddenly felt bad for bringing us there. We assured him it was not his fault. Rosa looked up the nearest subway. I found a McDonald's nearby that we could bail to, and a coupon that we could use if we downloaded the app. We had almost settled on our combo order when, a metal door next to us suddenly opened and a few people stumbled out of the party. In the gap, we looked at one another and then looked at the door. We were still 10 or 15 people away from the proper entrance where the bouncer was seated. The exit door was heavy, but it paused briefly before swinging shut, just long enough that Alberto could stick a sneaker in between, slowing its path. The moment is etched in my memory, glorified in sepia. The door wasn't ajar, but open long enough to slip through, long enough for the three of us to make our entry. We scurried down the stairs. The McDonald's app had not yet closed on my phone, and the lights from the screens in whites and French fry yellows and Big Mac browns lit our descent. Sound from the dance floor made the walls undulate as if we were traversing some kind of reverse birth canal. The guards yelled after us, but we were so small and so tan and had inspired something. Others from the line had come in with us, tired of waiting in line for no reason. At the landing, we slipped into the red and purple lights downstairs and became invisible. Of course, the party inside was underwhelming. No one was dancing, just sitting around, taking pictures. There weren't even that many people inside. But we were there for the music and for one another. We thrashed and span on the empty dance floor. We're bum rushing the art world, Arboto yelled, and we laughed because he was right. We were finding our own way into the party. I loved working at the Whitney. I was happy being around art all the time, even if I often went days without looking at any of it. Its mere presence outside my office was hydrating. I loved making stupid little maquettes and tiny exhibition models and placing dumb, colorful post-it notes in exhibition catalogs. I loved the plushness of the carpets under my feet as I made full-color copies at the printer, nestled in the cubicle past the curator's glass-walled offices. I felt like the seagulls I could see flying over the Hudson. The internship fulfilled what I imagined working at a museum might be like. Both the monotony of desk work, but also the unpredictability and excitement of working around art and living artists. Once I had to figure out how to dampen the smell of 200 car fresheners that were being used in an installation so that they did not nauseate the guards and museum goers. I went to Beastie Feast in the West Village at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday and charged 3 bags of cat litter to a Whitney credit card, and then sat in the loading dock of the museum carefully smothering each freshener in the gray powder, wondering if we could absorb the smell of mint green forest as well as it could cat urine. It didn't. We had arrived at the museum at a tumultuous time. Just months earlier, the museum had descended from the celebration of its new building into protest and controversy. At the latest edition of its famous survey of American art, the Whitney Biennial, a white painter named Dana Schutz exhibited a painting titled Open Casket, based on the famous photograph of the funeral of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy who was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. In an open letter, the artist and critic Hannah Black called for the immediate removal and destruction of the painting, arguing that it perpetuated the violence that it had drawn inspiration from, a white woman using the life of a black boy. Black's letter was endlessly dissected in think pieces and op-eds. While there were some supporters, it largely drew sharp criticism. Many came to Schutz's defense over the seemingly noble, romantic terms of the artist's right to empathy, or took issue with Black's call to remove and destroy the painting. Writers such as Zadie Smith and Coco Fusco argued that Black essentialized identity and argued that art should not be overdetermined by the races of its makers or subjects. I agreed with those non-essentialing arguments, but I identified most strongly with Black's provocation. She staked out a critical cultural politics that felt vital and new. It questioned whom a museum was for and by whom its exhibitions were made. It insisted that art was not exempt from racial dynamics of the rest of the world, no matter how beautiful or transcendental it might aim to be. Even if we could debate the letter's exact semantics, to me, Rosa and Alberto, Black's argument was an emotional declaration of exhaustion. It vocalized a frustration with the art world's empty gestures of politics and identity rather than systemic structural change, the administration of diversity rather than a rethinking of why diversity was needed to begin with. Just one more section in this bit. The biennial closed just days before we arrived at the museum, but some days we could still feel its aftershocks. It felt like no small coincidence that our intern class was the first to be paid a sizable stipend. $5,000 for the summer, the most of any museum internship at the time, likely the result of years of internal work and external pressure. We eyed our relationship to this diversity and inclusion warily, suspecting it might come with a price. Some of us were asked to feature in a promotional video for the internship. Alberto had been tapped for a longer interview, but Rosa and I had not, and we joked that our backgrounds were not sufficiently oppressed to make for good diversity video fodder. Watching the video later, we watched the other interns, our friends, as they walked down the High Line, smiling, laughing, likely talking about how odd the circumstance was, their colorful faces an adornment to a voiceover testimony. It was 2017, and Trump had recently been inaugurated, so our jobs were our jobs, but also historical absolution for the institution, for all the people of color it had not hired. We were reluctant poster children for a future that had not yet materialized, and we were unclear what our entry into that system might mean. And I'm just going to read one more section from this bit, so I think it'll be good to talk about. So it was at an opening at a Chinatown gallery, 47 Canal, on an evening after a late day at the internship that I saw my first Telfar bag. Rosa and Alberto were busy that day, so I went alone. I didn't know anyone, but I recognized people, artists whose work I had seen in museums and galleries. Annika Yi, dressed in a light blue Fendi jumpsuit with matching gloves, stood out. She made sculptures out of unconventional materials like spit and bacteria. She was receiving long overdue attention for her work with several large museum shows, and I was in a bit of awe. On the V of her elbow, I spotted a little square baggie with that unmistakable logo, a T inside of a C. It was shiny and mysterious, understated yet glaring. The fact that Annika, a successful critical artist, was wearing it made it even more alluring to me. In 2018 New York, a Telfar bag, a boxy purse modeled after the proportions of a Bloomingdale shopping bag, was to be immediately identified and desired, hard to get a hold of via the brand's elusive drops. Founded in 2005 by Telfar Clemens, a young Liberian-American from Queens, Telfar is a unisex fashion brand that he describes as genderless, democratic, and transformative, built around a community of creatives who have historically not been represented in fashion. After that night, I started to notice the bag around the city, at LES openings and magazine parties and galleries. Artists I admired posted stories with the bag on Instagram. I counted and recounted how much it would be to spend a month's grocery money on a handbag, on a piece of candied rebellion. Compared with other luxury handbags, which may go for thousands of dollars, Telfar's prices are relatively affordable. The bag comes in 3 sizes and ranges in price from $150 to $260, numbers based on how much you would make on a given night DJing. Since they were first released in 2014, Telfar's bags have grown into a symbol of identity not only for many artists and creatives, but now also for a worldwide celebrity clientele, including Beyonce, Oprah Winfrey, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The bag's covetability and the fact that it sells out within minutes have earned it the name the Bushwick Birkin, after the luxury handbag that Hermes goes for upward of $30,000. To Rosa, Alberto, and me, getting a Telfar bag was more than just an acquisition of a status symbol. It was an act of support for a figure who was unapologetically queer and Black. Telfar had found success in the fashion industry, which, like the culture surrounding the art world, had historically rejected people like him. Getting a Telfar bag would be a rejoinder to what was happening at the Whitney, a way to show allegiance to a future that was dedicated to the vanguard Hannah Black had outlined. We felt a kinship. Telfar also seemed to symbolize a certain disregard for the mainstream. He rejected Met Gala invitations, ended his wholesale business to better control his sales, ignored the fashion calendar, and catered to the crowd that he valued most, his friends and family. For his first show in Italy, he rented a palace where his friends, including such famous Black luminaries as Solange Knowles, Kalila, and Kelsey Lu, could join him for a dinner and sleepover, the aftermath of which was presented as the show to the public. The master's tools and money were being used to destroy the master's house, said Terrence Nance, a filmmaker who was there. Or at least throw paint at it that he can't get off. Even if renting a palace is not quite destroying the master's house, there was something of this rebellious energy that we were still intrigued by. While we sought our way into the traditional art establishment, we were just beginning to sense that what was happening outside of it was just as, if not more vital. We waited diligently until the next online drop, and I ordered a Telfar bag in green, Rosa in black, and Alberto in gray. So maybe we'll pause there. It's kind of a lot, but I wonder, what are your initial reactions?
I have so many reactions, but it's so obviously relatable. My first New York job, as you know, because it was with you, was an internship at MoMA. Very kind of similar feelings. I think, you talked about Dana Schutz and the many reactions to her work being at the Whitney, and the word exhaustion really stuck with me. I think we spoke about this a little bit before, but it's really interesting being at an institute. Exhaustion, but also relating to that, the idea of being kind of the token. You didn't use the word, but kind of being the token, being in all the press and being in the videos for a reason that you might be able to assume. And I think those go really hand in hand. I know that at MoMA, it felt like most of the interns in my cohort were people of color as well. But it's really interesting being in that cohort and looking up and seeing no one else of color. And so it's kind of, I guess, people talk about, diversity and what that means, but it is very strange and it feels very performative when it's only at one level, and that level is a level that isn't listened to. No one's listening to the interns. And so it does kind of feel as if it's for show a lot of the time. And that can be exhausting.
Yeah, I think when I was going through it, I had mixed feelings also of a great deal of gratefulness to be there and to have money and to get some money out of it. And I think there's a way that there's this dynamic of it that it's supposed to feel like philanthropy or some kind of uplift. And I think it is those things. It basically is those things in a lot of ways. But I think also what drew me to the Telfar project, and also maybe around how you kind of carved out your own gallery in the space, is that Telfar thinks a lot also about, he says my project isn't about inclusivity. He says what do you want to be included in? He wants to kind of widen the horizon by which people are working, and part of it felt like it was about not necessarily always kind of looking up, but actually just looking around you, and the people next to you, and let's do our thing together, right? Rather than having to aim for it elsewhere. It's just two different things.
No, for sure. And this is a great example of that because we were there together, and now, as we move through the art world, we're moving through the art world together. Yeah. And I think that's really beautiful. And I do think that in 20 years, it's going to look very different than it does now because of that, which is beautiful. And I'm very optimistic for those reasons.
Yeah, and I think in many ways it's happening in some degrees, not necessarily for Black or Black female in particular demographics, but by some metrics, there's a certain parity with Asian American demographics population-wise in the US and how many there are in museums. And I think it begs the larger question of class and things like that, which I think we can get more into. But maybe I'll go to the next section. It'll be shorter than the first one. Okay, so this next one's about working at MoMA, which is when we were both there. So I was an administrative assistant in the painting and sculpture department for 2 years. I worked for a wonderful curator, Michelle Ho. We can name names here, I guess. And Hannah was a 12-month intern through the Studio Museum Fellowship, or?
It was the Friends of Education at the time, which is now the Black Arts Council. They sponsor an internship every year, and it was painting and sculpture the year that I applied to painting and sculpture. And I'm actually still part of the Black Arts Council to this day, so it was a really beautiful experience and really supportive.
Okay, so I'll read a little bit about being at MoMA. This is from a later essay in the book. The larger essay, this one is about histories of Asian American art collectives in the city, but it's kind of a little bit about my time in MoMA as well. 3 years into living in the city, I finally made it to the site of my art world aspiration, or at least close enough. Turns out the Temple of Modernism provides healthcare, a stable salary, and unfettered access to a colored printer. I was an administrative assistant who moved pastel blocks around on my Google Cal for my boss and opened mail with a little metal knife. But I was working for a person I admired and respected, whom I could learn from. As part of my job at MoMA, I could suggest artists for acquisition, for exhibition, and in that way make an indelible mark on the art world and its future. Not in an official way, of course, but even at this insignificant of a level, I could feel the power that I was sitting near. Entry into the MoMA art collection has ripple effects for an artist's career, the artist's market, their life. I felt a kind of responsibility. I had access to the gates now, or at least access to the gatekeepers. Who would I help let in? When I arrived, MoMA was on the eve of its 2019 reopening after 2 years of renovations. The history of renovations of MoMA is a story in and of itself. The 2004 Yoshio Taniguchi renovation, which connected the galleries, sculpture garden, and offices with translucent glass boxes, cost more than $850 million. This most recent expansion by the architecture firm Diller Scofidio Renfro bulldozed the American Folk Art Museum next door, selling its air rights to a Shard-like luxury apartment building to fund a $450 million expansion. I was sitting casually in my little cubicle nestled in over $1 billion worth of construction, sandwiched between multi-million-dollar investment properties, on the grave of folk and idiosyncratic art in my Uniqlo pants and Tevas, with my little Best Simon email signature. I was generally wary about the proximity of extreme capital accumulation and art, unnerved by the unsavory way those fortunes were made, but truthfully, I was just so happy to have healthcare and stable salary for once. It was my first actual full-time job in the art world after 3 years of internships and fellowships, and I didn't even mind the corporate feeling nature of it. It felt like growing up. And honestly, as a first-generation person who abated my guilt with success, working at MoMA was a very tangible, even somewhat recognizable marker of success. It validated what I felt was the sacrifice inherent in the pursuit of a creative passion. I felt that I could do good work championing marginalized artists there too. As part of its reopening, the museum would be rehanging its permanent collection galleries, those galleries that house the Starry Night and Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and Pollux, that inscribed Western art history into canon. The renovation was an opportunity to complicate MoMA's largely male, largely European collection, considering decades of art historical research, critical race theory, feminism, and common sense. Part of this was reflected in the museum's acquisition strategy. In the fall of 2019, it announced that it'd be deaccessioning a painting by Fernand Léger. It was a triplicate, actually, of a Fernand Léger, to acquire work by Brazilian artist Tarsila do Amaral, as well as many others by pioneering women artists. My part in this rehang was small. Most of the planning was completed when I arrived, and my job description was largely administrative anyway. But it didn't matter so much what I did, really. I was happy to staple and make Google Docs and meeting notes so that I could observe and learn. I was inside one of the largest, most influential museums in the world, and the corporate cushion and strict job description allowed me the headspace to continue with my other activities outside of it, to nurture my more DIY and subcultural interests. I did feel at MoMA a kind of tension between the institutional work that paid my rent and the anti-institutional activity that fed my soul. I remember one day those interests coming into conflict. I was sitting in my cubicle at MoMA and sorting mail. I memorized phone extensions and made transfers. I typed in my notes app about potential acquisitions. I finalized an itinerary to China for my curator's travel. I took a lunch break. I took minutes in a meeting about getting image rights for a catalog we were producing. Afterward, I went home. When I opened my phone, I saw on Hyperallergic that there had been a protest at the museum. Presumably, I had been there in meetings at my cubicle in my room, but I had not known. I had been so caught up in the day in the bureaucracy of diversity that I had not noticed an interruption on the lower floor. The tenets of the protest proposed that the museum stood for a colonial mindset and that on principle it should be rethought. They pointed out the museum's ties to the NYPD, the unsavory activities and investments of its board members, I felt torn between the kind of work I was doing in the office, acquiring artists from marginalized groups and historical gaps and producing programs around it, and my solidarity for the initiatives of the protests just a few stories below me. Initiatives that reminded me of the energy of other Asian American art collectives. From a bird's eye view, I imagined two versions of myself. One in a cubicle, watering the little succulent I had gotten from my desk, updating Excel sheets in museums, picking little corporate outfits, grateful to be climbing the ranks of the art world hierarchy, and another down below, holding a picket sign, copy editing manifestos, making Gmail listservs, working to dismantle it. So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. We talked about this a little bit before, but that's something that I thought about a lot as an intern at MoMA, kind of this like bird's eye view and seeing myself in two places. And I always kind of thought of it, speaking of the NYPD, kind of like the way that some people think about, you know, good versus bad cops. Can you be a good cop in a systematically bad institution? And so, you know, I did feel like there was a lot of really positive change at MoMA while we were there as an intern. I think you might have had more ability to make an impression on the institution in the position that you were in. I felt like I really didn't at all, which is fine, but I was really able to learn a ton and see kind of the positive change happening. And you know, if I had stayed in museums, the goal would have been to try to disrupt, and that's a really kind of aggressive word, but more just, you know, try to insert my values into the institutions that I was in. But there was also always kind of a voice in the back of my head saying, can I actually make a difference? Or am I just helping push forward toxicity or furthering the oppression of my people, kind of. And so that was something I thought about all the time.
Yeah, I think it's easy to think of these in like binary terms, of like not working there, working there. It's like, we see these people all the time, we're around them, they're our friends, they're our colleagues.
For sure,
like,
and I respect them.
Absolutely, and it remains a continued kind of negotiation of like, just finding your own place within this space that feels like real and good. You know, as is now like fabled story, you know, you were at MoMA, and then in a bit, you know, a few months, a few years later, went to starting your own gallery. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the mindset change from like being at MoMA and then moving to your own space.
A lot of it was honestly this conversation that we're having now, which is that there was so many beautiful things that I saw, but there was also things that I wanted to change, and I felt like instead of just complaining about it, I might as well do something about it and add to the conversation, because again, there is so much beauty in the New York art world, and there's always going to be flaws, there's always going to be things that are missing, and so the only thing we can really do is, not the only thing, but something that you could really do, and the thing that I felt like I could do the best at was to open my own space and try to change things from like truly the inside out. And yeah, that was my strategy. Whereas I do know people who stayed in the institution or different institutions that have been doing amazing work that way as well. So there's, you know, different ways, of course.
I wanted to touch back on something we were talking about in the last section about a person like Telfar who is looking to build a business out of blackness, out of queer blackness, and I think coming from the personal experiences we came to, and then when you're approaching a gallery, which is also many, many things, and then one of those things being a business, I wonder how you've had to navigate, you know, billing or framing yourself around these kind of questions.
It's really hard. The business part of it is the hardest part for me, because I never took a business class, one. And then, you know, working in museums, we never really thought about it that way. But also because I feel like my passion gets in the way of my business in terms of, you know, if I want to work with an artist who might not sell very well, but I think the work is really important, because I don't have a business mind, I show the work anyways, which I think is a good thing, but I do think that like working in museums, I find that my mindset is more museum-based, you know. We do a lot more programming, we do installations that don't sell, But there is also kind of this person in the back of my mind saying, can you say that? Can you do that? You don't want to, piss off a whole community of people because they could be your clients, which I've never had to grapple with before. I was always able to be as open and honest about the way I feel and things like that. So it's kind of ironic because now that I am doing my own thing, I do feel a little bit more silent in some ways, which is interesting. I'm curious how you feel in your practice, if you feel like it's pigeonholed you, or if you're able to be as honest and open as you'd like to be.
I think I try to be as honest and open as I can as well. I think pigeonholing is actually like a kind of economic term, in the sense that like if the only means by which you can survive as a business is by selling a certain thing, then that I think is a form of, becomes a kind of pigeonholing. And if you can navigate conditions where that's not the only thing, you're not entirely beholden to that, then I think that's a kind of freedom. So it was part of what I was trying to get down on paper in the book. I think of that these things aren't like so clear cut. It's not like museums are bad, like protests good. Like it's just not so simple. It's not. And the experience of being a real person in the world is that you go to all of these things all the time, that they're all connected, and just having the ability to like think deeply about like what's happening behind the thing that's happening, like, what is actually happening here. I think finding a way to be true to yourself and free in that is really important. And maybe I'll read this last section, which is on the history of Robin, the pop singer, and I think it has a bit to do with this feeling. Go. Later, in the midst of pandemic isolation, Julie, Michelle, and Ekin and I made nightclubs out of our apartment. We danced with Rachel, Julio, and Jaren in bedrooms and flicked light switches, and yes, sniffed poppers again to simulate the dance floor. We played our own music. We worked our way through a list of hits, from Sophie to Toxic to Twice, and in the late hours to I Want to Dance with Somebody and Dancing Queen, and to Dancing on My Own, of course. Robin's spirited independence and resilience soundtracked my time at the Whitney. I learned that she signed a record deal at 14 based on a song she wrote about her parents' divorce at 11, that she rejected a contract with a major US label because the terms limited her creative freedom. The alternative that Jive found was a 15-year-old American teen named Britney Spears, someone the label thought could be, quote, an American Robin, a Europop teen queen with an added dash of Girl Next Door. I learned that in 2005, after 2 albums in the pop machine, Robin founded her own label to further preserve her artistic freedom. Quote, I knew I could change the structure from the bottom up, but it wasn't something that I could fix within the system, Robin told NME in 2020. I spent so much time trying to do that, and it got to the point where I was like, this is not gonna work. It was definitely disconnecting that helped me do what I wanted to do, end quote. Robin redefined her audience by building her own record label, and this redefinition, like the black queer immigrant of Telfar's Everyone, was the radical act. Robin is a pop star's pop star, and a rebellious energy is imbued in the sorrow and joy of a song like Dancing on My Own. If the art world is an unrequited lover, or an ex who would be better if we moved on from, then dancing on our own meant making our own rooms rather than pursuing the hallowed halls of the institution. This didn't mean that we didn't still yearn for a toxic relationship, that it didn't bring us to making poor decisions. I'm so messed up, I'm so out of line. But in the face of crumbling institutions, we dance to survive, as Robin hinted herself at in a 2010 interview. Quote, I dance a lot by myself. I dance at home when I brush my teeth. It's not even real dancing to music every time. But it can be that I just do things with my body or with my hands. For me, dancing is not something I always do in a club environment with other people, but it's something I do to check myself, like taking the temperature or checking my own pulse, end quote. The emphasis she places on dancing seems to suggest that it might also be something like persisting or loving or aliving, running, building, moving, despite the absence of attention from an entity you once thought you needed. It is a method of navigating desire and power. To dance on our own is to move from critique into joy. It describes the feeling of Robin's song, a bedrock of sadness with a vaulted cathedral ceiling of elation and possibility. I don't mean to suggest that we should leave critique behind, but that joy is a kind of existence that doesn't rely on being against anything. It just is. To approach identity with the utmost sympathy for the kinds of belonging it might promise, but to look beyond it. This is what it means to dance on your own. I want us to dance in spaces where we never had to fight to belong. So, there's that. And maybe I wanted to ask, as you've been building your own project and stuff, have you worked to get to joy, or to what happiness has been as an intuition, even thing, guiding you?
No, that's beautiful. I think kind of right off the bat, joy was the most important thing to me in the business. Like, I always would say, like, I didn't open a gallery to work with people who didn't bring me joy, to work with work that didn't bring me joy. But also, I really relate to the last part of that paragraph, because especially when I first opened, kind of the language around the gallery was, you know, that it was disrupting and that it was against the art world that already existed. And I found that really interesting because I never said that. I always just talked about what I was doing, and people took it as against something. And I think that always happens when you're doing something different from the norm. It has to be against the norm, when it doesn't necessarily have to be. It was truly just doing what was giving me joy. Yeah. And 2 years in, it's not talked about in that way as much, but joy is still, like, truly the biggest thing to me. My favorite part of the work is working with my artists. I represent 5 artists, and they've all become really good friends, and that's a really important part to me. Yeah, that's what I would say. What about you?
Yeah, I feel like happiness or joy is an emotion that gets less creative shrift, perhaps. There's that quote that, like, all happy families are happy in the same way, and but unhappy families are, like, interesting, and it's easier to kind of romanticize hardship. And I guess part of this was just like trying to put more words towards the idea of a more complex joy or happiness as, like, something that can be critical too. It doesn't have to be like Marie Kondo, like, brings you joy. Like, it kind of, like, is a word that has so evaporated of meaning that it just, like, sort of stops. But it was interesting to me to try to put more words to it, I guess. Yeah.
Definitely, and I think everybody has a job in life, and you kind of pick your own job, but some people's job is to, like I was saying, stay in an institution and work at it from that point. Some jobs are to do your own thing, some jobs are to talk about it on social media, and we need every single one of those people in order to create the ecosystem that we exist in. And there's going to be, positives and negatives to all of those things. But you just kind of have to choose your path, because there's going to be hardship. And also, there's issues when you're doing something. If you were just sitting on your couch, there wouldn't be anything to discuss, do you know what I mean? But because we're out there doing things, whether it be in the institution or on our own, there's going to be positives and negatives to talk about and experience and go through.
Maybe we'll open it up at this point for any sort of question. Brian?
Yeah, when you were talking about your ambivalence around institutional dynamics, I remembered that you used to work at Archive, or maybe still work at Archive. And so I'm just wondering what you think about these organizations that try to invent new institutional formats, and, like, where do they succeed and where do they end up replicating what already exists? Is there any, have they had any success doing something different?
Yeah, thanks for that. I was here last year for another talk, actually under the auspices of this organization Brian is mentioning called Archive, which I actually no longer work for at the moment, but was billed as a kind of like Web3 museum, in the sense being that if a traditional museum has a board of trustees and curators that are selecting what goes into it, this organization was trying to use some kind of decentralized group chat, essentially, to make collective decisions about what would enter into the museum. And I was super skeptical about it for a really long time. I remain skeptical, but it felt more exciting to be in it and to try to work with it than to just like write it off or something. And I think I was really interested in the energy behind it, of like this kind of using technology towards decentralization. It was a real interesting peek into tech world, which is like fueled by like hysterical optimism, and it was just like, okay, like sure, I'll take a little bit of this and then kind of do what you need to do. And it's interesting enough, like the trouble with it was that it was going to have to exist in a world where capitalism is also a thing, and they were like, how are we going to make money? So for like 7 or 8 months, it was really exciting, and it was like going to be completely decentralized, and anybody could join, and it was kind of like a nice experiment. And then they're still incubating and trying to figure out how to make money because they have to sort of survive somehow. But yeah, that's my experience with the archive, at least. Thanks, Brian. Any other questions?
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Big fan.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll be here. We can talk more. Thank you so much for coming.